Well, thank you very, very much, Jonah, for that very generous introduction. In an age whose hallmark form of expression may well be the tweet, I'm glad to be part of a community of people represented here in this room for whom books are absolutely central. Writers, readers, reviewers, booksellers, editors, publishers. And I'm sure there are a lot of you here who belong simultaneously to 4, 5, or 6 of those different categories. I'm particularly honored to receive an award in Fred Cody's name. I never knew Fred, sadly, or his wife Pat, but I sure spent a lot of time in the bookstore that they started, as I'm sure many of you here have done also. And besides being one of the best bookstores anywhere on earth, it was also many other things as well. It was a place where you went to meet your friends. It was a place where you ran into your friends even if you weren't intending to. It was a place where sometimes you could see writers whom you admired, also looking for books in the store. And it was a place where important events were marked, whether they had to do with books or not. I remember, for example, an evening at Cody's Books that was celebrating the holding of the first democratic elections in South Africa in 1994. And it strikes me that a bookstore is an appropriate place to celebrate something like that. And in fact, there are historical precedents. When I ended up studying for my book, Bury the Chains, the early British anti-slavery movement, I was delighted to find that the founding meeting of that movement took place on May 22nd, 1787, in a London bookstore. So there's a long association between books, bookstores, and people who care about changing the world. Cody's Books was more than that, too. It was a site during the great anti-war demonstrations of the late 1960s in Berkeley. It was a place of refuge and at times functioned as a first aid station. And it was because of that that a police tear gas canister came sailing through the window there at one point. It was also the site of an act of great political courage some years later, when Andy Ross and his staff voted unanimously to continue to sell Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, despite a bomb that had been tossed through the window and threats of further action against the store. Now, we don't know what kinds of threats those of us who care about books are going to be facing in the years ahead. But I'm less worried about bombs and tear gas canisters and even the National Security Administration than I am by certain other kinds of threats. One of them is the set of distractions of all kinds that speed up our lives and promise instant information, instant answers, instant solutions. The cell phone, the computer screen, further advances in technology and robotics that we can't even anticipate. The essence of a book, I think, whether it's a book of poetry, a novel, a work of nonfiction, a play, is that it doesn't have an instant answer. A book, at its very best, is a long, slow-burning fuse. Another danger I worry about, of course, is oligopoly in the publishing industry and the trend towards ever larger advances for a small number of writers, leaving less and less for everybody else. I also worry about oligopoly in the book selling industry and more of the remaining independent bookstores going the way of Cody's Books. Further, there's the problem of the shrinkage in the number of newspapers that review books, take books seriously, write articles about books, and of the space for such things in those newspapers that still do. And final danger, I think, is the illusion, and it really is an illusion, that everything you ever wanted to know can be found on the internet. And coupled with that, the way that authors are sometimes thought of as mere content providers. Nonetheless, I think for many of these trends, there are counter-trends. Although there is no substitute for a great bookstore, the internet does enable you to find more obscure and out-of-print books than you could do otherwise, and that's something I've often taken advantage of. And although I mourn that shrinkage of book coverage in newspapers, there's such a proliferation of places on the web now where people can talk about the books they love and often do so very, very intelligently. And although I still feel there is no substitute for print on paper, electronics has allowed the flourishing of a new medium of sorts, for a place where pieces of writing can be seen that are too long for a magazine article and too short for a book. Despite the pressures that weigh on all of us, I think books will survive. After all, there were 620 million printed books sold in the United States last year. And do you know the two categories in which that number rose compared to the year before? Fiction and nonfiction for children. So I think the book has a future, and I wish all best of possible success to all of you here who are engaged in creating that future. Thank you again.